against the windowpane of Willow Creek Care Home, a crumbling structure hidden behind overgrown hedges and rusted gates that creaked like haunted voices when pushed. Inside, a small, sterile room held the body of Eleanor Ward, covered in a thin white sheet. The fluorescent light above her flickered, casting long shadows across the worn wallpaper. There were no flowers, no visitors, no last goodbyes. Eleanor had died quietly in her sleep. She'd once been vibrant, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit. A survivor of abandonment, poverty, and single motherhood in a time that punished women for daring to live without a man. She had given her life to 3 children, Melissa, Daniel, and Grace, pouring into them every ounce of warmth she had left after their father vanished one rainy night without a word. She never remarried, never stopped working, never complained. And yet, when her strength gave out, no one came. The funeral was quick. 2 nurses stood in the back, bowing their heads out of duty. A priest read from a card, his voice barely louder than the wind rustling through the nearby trees. Melissa arrived late, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Daniel sat stiffly in the front row, checking his watch. Grace stood apart, arms crossed, face unreadable. No one cried. No one spoke. To them, it was an obligation. Then came the man in the gray coat. Tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying a worn leather briefcase, he approached the siblings outside the chapel, his polished shoes sinking into the mud. His voice was calm, too calm, considering the moment. "Excuse me, Melissa, Daniel, Grace Ward?" They turned as one, their confusion identical. "My name is Roland Keene. I'm the executor of Eleanor Ward's estate. I believe your mother left behind something unexpected." Daniel scoffed. "She had an estate?" Keene didn't smile. "She did. And she also left instructions, very specific ones." Melissa's brow furrowed. "Instructions for what?" Keene opened his briefcase, pulling out 3 sealed envelopes. Each was marked with a name in Eleanor's precise handwriting. But there was a 4th envelope, one different from the rest. It was addressed not to a family member, but to someone none of them recognized. "Who's Jonas Hale?" Grace asked, eyeing the name with suspicion. Keene paused. "That is where things begin to get complicated." He handed over the letters and cleared his throat. "Your mother's will stipulates that the estate will not be divided, contested, or distributed until certain conditions are met. There are truths that must come to light first." Melissa stepped back, clutching her envelope like it might burn her fingers. "What kind of truths?" "She left you a path to follow," Keene said. "It starts with her words. Then it will be up to you to decide how far you're willing to go." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Are you saying she left everything to this Jonas person?" Keene's silence was louder than any answer. And just like that, the ground beneath them began to shift. They had come expecting ashes and closure. What they received was the opening line of a mystery, a challenge from the woman they had abandoned. A final, deliberate message from the grave. Eleanor Ward may have died alone, but she was not done speaking. The lawyer's words echoed like a bell toll inside the sterile conference room where the siblings had gathered. Melissa sat closest to the edge, legs crossed, fingers trembling against her phone screen. Daniel stood by the window, jaw clenched, watching the clouds roll over the hills like a storm waiting to break. Grace leaned against the doorframe, distant and quiet, her arms folded tightly across her chest like armor. Roland Keene cleared his throat, deliberately placing the 4th envelope, addressed to Jonas Hale, at the center of the table. Its presence was a fracture in the air. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, voice even. "Eleanor Ward has named Jonas Hale as the sole beneficiary of her estate." "No," Daniel snapped. "No, that's not possible. That's a mistake." Keene didn't blink. "It's not. I reviewed the documents myself. signed, notarized, and legally binding. She left letters for each of you, and a clause stating that the contents of her will cannot be contested unless the full sequence of her final instructions is followed. Melissa leaned forward. What the hell does that mean? What instructions? Keene placed 3 envelopes in front of them. Your mother wanted you to know why she made this decision. But she also wanted you to earn the right to know. Each of you must read your letter privately. There will be more steps. Grace's voice cracked through the tension. You still haven't told us who Jonas Hale is. Keene looked at her, longer than necessary, as if weighing whether the truth could be said yet. All I can say is that Jonas Hale is not a stranger to your mother. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. Well, he's sure as hell a stranger to us. Keene nodded solemnly. That will change. The siblings stared at the envelope like it was ticking. Something about the name Jonas itched in the back of Melissa's mind. She couldn't place it, but it wasn't completely unfamiliar. Still, her pride surged louder than her instincts. So we're just supposed to play along? Chase ghosts for some estate she never even told us about? Melissa hissed. She didn't want us around when she was alive. Grace flinched. No, we didn't want to be around. Silence fell like a guillotine. Keene took a step back. Eleanor knew her children would have questions, but she also knew answers aren't free. She left behind more than just a will. She left a reckoning. He slid a final paper across the table, a typed itinerary. There are locations she wants you to visit, letters you'll find along the way. The first is in the house on Wren Street. Daniel's hands curled into fists. Our old house? That place was condemned. Keene's eyes darkened. Your mother spent the last of her savings making sure it wasn't. The siblings were too stunned to speak. Across town, in a modest apartment lined with hand-me-down books and fading photographs, a man named Jonas Hale sat alone, unaware that his life was about to collide with a storm he never saw coming. In his hand, he held his own envelope, already opened. Inside, one line from Eleanor's handwriting stared up at him like a whisper from the grave. It's time they knew who you are. Melissa stared at the envelope like it might burst into flames. Her mother's handwriting, delicate but firm, hadn't changed since childhood. Melissa rose, it read, as if Eleanor were still calling her in from the porch, reminding her to eat, to study, to rest. But now, the voice was only memory, and the silence between them was too wide to ignore. She opened it alone in her car, the engine off, the windows fogged. The paper inside smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The ink was smudged in places, as though Eleanor had cried while writing it. But Eleanor never cried, not even the day their father disappeared. My Melissa, you were always the one with fire in your chest and frost in your eyes. I saw you carry burdens too early. You tried to become the adult when I couldn't afford to be weak. But in doing so, you hardened. You turned away from me before I even knew how to reach you. I failed you, and you punished me for it. But there is something you must know. You don't have the whole story. You think your father vanished. You think I chose bitterness over healing. You're wrong on both counts. There's more. So much more. And now, it's time to uncover it. Melissa read the letter 3 times before she folded it and pressed it to her chest. Her eyes remained dry, but her knuckles whitened against the steering wheel. She didn't go home. She didn't call Daniel or Grace. She simply drove. The road blurred, but Eleanor's words stayed sharp, cutting through her with surgical precision. Across town, Daniel read his own letter at his kitchen counter, jaw tight, untouched whiskey glass sweating beside him. The words had started cold but shifted into something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt. My son, you always believed silence was strength, that if you kept everything inside, no one could hurt you. But it was never about strength, it was about fear. You feared becoming him. You feared becoming me. But you were never like us. You were always better. I know you tried to protect your sisters when I couldn't. But I also know you walked away long before I asked you to. You were right to suspect things weren't as they seemed. Now it's your turn to find the answers I couldn't give while I was alive." Daniel folded the letter slowly. His hands trembled for the first time in years. He thought of Eleanor in that sterile room, alone. He had told himself she chose that isolation. But maybe that was just easier than admitting he'd helped put her there. Grace's letter arrived late. It came in a separate envelope, delivered by courier, not given at the will reading like the others. She opened it on the balcony of her apartment, her trembling fingers barely managing to unseal the flap. "Gracie, you were the only one who still heard my voice in the end. You just stopped answering. I don't blame you. I know the pain you carry, the shame, the silence. But this is not about blame anymore. This is about truth. You have always known when something wasn't right. Trust that instinct now. Start with the basement on Wren Street. There's something down there that no one else remembers. Something I buried. Something you once saw." Grace froze, the last line hammering in her head. She had seen something. A shadow in the hallway. A conversation behind closed doors. A night she was told to forget. But the memory clawed its way back now. Sharp. Uninvited. The siblings had spent years running from their past. Now Eleanor's final words were pulling them back into a history littered with half-truths, buried betrayals, and a mystery that began long before they knew how to name it. And Jonas Hale? He was only the beginning. Like a ghost, its silhouette warped by time and neglect. Wren Street had once been a peaceful place, a row of modest homes and rose gardens, where screen doors slammed behind children and the smell of supper floated on the wind. Now, it was a skeleton of its former self. Weeds strangled the walkway, shutters hung at odd angles. The paint on the Ward home had long since peeled away, leaving behind gray wood like dry skin. Melissa was the first to arrive. She stood in front of the house with her arms crossed, reluctant to go in but unable to walk away. Daniel pulled up next, stepping out of his car with a grunt, taking in the decay. Grace came last, silent and pale. For a long moment they stood in silence, like strangers before a tomb. "The hell are we even doing here?" Daniel muttered, kicking a rock down the walkway. "She told us to come," Grace said softly. Melissa didn't look at them. "The first clue, that's what the lawyer said?" Daniel scoffed. "This isn't a treasure hunt. It's manipulation. She's playing us from the grave." "She wouldn't do this without a reason," Grace whispered. The front door creaked as Melissa pushed it open. Dust spiraled in the air like ash. The smell was sharp, mildew and something older. Something that smelled like regret. They stepped inside and were swallowed by the darkness of their past. The living room was almost untouched since the day they'd left it. A tattered couch. A leaning bookshelf. The faded wallpaper Eleanor once fought so hard to keep clean. Memories hung in the air like cobwebs. "It feels frozen," Grace said, shivering. Melissa ran her fingers across the mantel, brushing away years of dust. Her hand paused over a framed photo, one of all 5 of them, long before their father vanished. Eleanor's smile was radiant. The man beside her, tall and dark-haired, had one arm around little Melissa and the other resting protectively on Daniel's shoulder. Grace was just a baby in Eleanor's arms. Daniel stared at it for a long time. "We were happy once," he murmured. Grace moved toward the hallway, drawn by something, an instinct. The letter said, "The basement." Melissa and Daniel followed her, one flickering flashlight between them. The basement door groaned open, revealing a steep staircase. As they descended, each step creaked like a warning. The air turned cold, thick with dust and memory. Boxes were stacked high, old furniture covered in sheets, but near the far wall, under a mildewed tarp, Grace found something strange. A small, locked trunk. Daniel forced it open with a crowbar they found near the boiler. Inside was a journal. Worn leather, Eleanor's name embossed faintly on the cover. Melissa opened it slowly, and instantly, her breath caught. The entries inside were dated from the year their father disappeared. Eleanor's handwriting was urgent, almost frantic. She wrote of suspicion, of lies, of nights he didn't come home, of phone calls that ended too quickly, and then one entry underlined 3 times. He's not the man I thought he was. I know about the other woman. I'm pregnant. He told me to get rid of it. I said no, and now he's gone. They stared at one another, horror creeping into their eyes. At the back of the journal was a torn photograph, folded over so many times it was soft as fabric. Melissa opened it gently. A newborn baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. But no name, no date. Just Eleanor's scribbled handwriting on the back. I had to protect him. Grace's hand shook as she whispered. She wasn't talking about Dad. She was talking about someone else. Daniel stepped back, his face pale. That baby, it wasn't one of us. Melissa closed the journal, her expression unreadable. Then, who was it? No one spoke the name out loud, but deep inside they all knew. Jonas. The silence in Melissa's car was suffocating. The journal lay in the passenger seat like a loaded gun, its contents reverberating in her head with unrelenting pressure. She had driven in circles for nearly an hour after they left the house on Ryn Street, unable to head home, unwilling to call Daniel or Grace. There was something she hadn't told them, something she had buried long ago and convinced herself didn't matter. But now, everything pointed back to it. She finally pulled into a dimly lit parking lot near a closed cafe, the place she always came to think. The dashboard light cast a faint glow on her face as she opened her phone and tapped on a contact she hadn't used in years. Voicemail. Daniel, I need to talk to you. Now, not about the will. About something I should have said a long time ago. Meet me at Dad's old storage unit. I still have the key. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, his face tight, his eyes guarded. He didn't say hello. Just crossed his arms as Melissa unlocked the rusted door. The metal screeched as it lifted, revealing dusty boxes, old tools, and the shell of a life they'd tried to forget. Melissa walked past the clutter and sat on an overturned crate. Do you remember that night? The one when Mom and Dad had that terrible fight? You and Grace were already asleep. Daniel didn't respond, but his body tensed. I heard voices downstairs. I thought it was just them again, arguing. But it wasn't just Dad, her voice cracked. There was someone else, a man I'd never heard before. I peeked through the stairs. Mom was crying, and the man, he wasn't touching her, but he was close, intimate. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Are you saying she was having an affair? Melissa shook her head. I didn't know what I was seeing. I was 10. I didn't understand, but now, after what we read in that journal. Daniel stepped closer. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I was scared. Because after that night, Dad was gone. Just vanished. And I thought, what if it had something to do with him finding out? She buried her face in her hands, voice trembling. I've lived with that question every day since. Daniel sank onto a nearby crate, the weight of her words hitting hard. You think that man, the one you saw, was Jonas's father? I don't know, she whispered. But I think Mom did everything she could to hide him. And now she's forcing us to face it. Daniel opened one of the old boxes absently, revealing faded Polaroids, notebooks, even toys from their childhood. He pulled out a photo. Eleanor, smiling, holding a baby that wasn't any of them, no timestamp, no clue. Melissa looked over his shoulder and went still. That blanket. The one in the photo. It's the same as in the journal picture. They stared at it together, hearts thudding. This wasn't just an affair, Melissa said slowly. This was a choice. A secret she carried all these years. And now she's dragging us through it, Daniel muttered. But Melissa shook her head. No, she's making us understand it. She stood, her resolve hardening. I don't know who Jonas really is, but I'm starting to think he was never the outsider. She looked Daniel in the eyes. We were. Daniel hadn't slept. The conversation with Melissa played over in his mind like a looping reel. Her trembling voice, the photo of the unknown baby, the man in the shadows. He had walked away from the storage unit with more questions than answers, but now something had shifted inside him. The anger that had once shielded him was cracking, revealing something else underneath. Curiosity, fear, and a gnawing sense of betrayal, not from Eleanor, but from the truth he had never been given. He poured himself a bitter cup of coffee, opened his laptop, and started searching. First, Jonas Hale. Dozens of results. A few social profiles. A vague obituary for an adoptive mother who died of cancer 6 years ago. Jonas had worked in several cities, mostly freelance design work. He was clean. Too clean. Like someone who had spent his life staying under the radar. Or hiding in plain sight. Daniel narrowed the search, digging through archived adoption records, though most were sealed. Until one line made his heart stop. Adoption finalized July 1991. Mother, Eleanor Ward. Birth name, child, male, renamed Jonas Hale. Adopted through private placement. Confidential records. His hands trembled. Jonas was born the same year their father vanished. It wasn't a coincidence. Daniel scoured deeper, using a backdoor research database he'd used once during a work investigation. He wasn't a tech expert, but he knew enough. He found an old address tied to Jonas's childhood, a foster home in Nevada, and a scanned school directory from middle school. Then, he found it. A photo. Grainy, scanned in black and white. But unmistakable. Jonas Hale, age 12, standing beside a man. Not a teacher, not a social worker. Daniel's blood ran cold. The man in the photo looked exactly like their father. Same square jaw. Same deep-set eyes. The same mole beneath the left ear. But it couldn't be him. Their father had disappeared in 1991. No contact, no sightings, no explanation. And yet, there he was, smiling, a protective hand on Jonas's shoulder. Daniel printed the image and stared at it, unable to breathe. Had he faked his disappearance? Started a second life? Left Eleanor for them? A wave of nausea rose in Daniel's gut as the timeline clicked into place. Eleanor's journal. The argument Melissa overheard. The baby. The vanishing. His father hadn't vanished. He'd left. Suddenly, a sharp knock snapped Daniel out of his spiral. He rushed to the door and opened it to find Grace, disheveled, eyes red. "I need to talk to you," she said breathlessly. Daniel froze. "I found something." They stood in the living room, neither speaking at first. Grace finally whispered, "He's not who we thought he was." Daniel handed her the printed photo. "No, he never was." Grace stared at the image, her lips parting in shock. She stopped. "That's Dad, with Jonas." "I don't know if he's alive," Daniel said. "But I know this. Eleanor didn't hide Jonas from us." He looked at her, voice breaking. "She protected us from him." Grace hadn't cried at the funeral. She hadn't cried when the will was read. She hadn't even cried when she first read her mother's letter. But now, as she sat on the cold tiles of her bathroom floor, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, she couldn't stop the tears. They came in waves, silent, heavy, relentless. She had ignored Eleanor's calls in the final months. Dozens of them. Sometimes the phone would ring late at night, her mother's number lighting up the screen like a ghost begging to be remembered. Grace would watch it blink until it went dark again. She had always told herself she had good reasons, too busy, too tired, too emotionally drained to re-enter that orbit of pain. She believed that if you built your life far enough away from your past, it couldn't find you. But Eleanor had found a way. The photo of their father with Jonas still sat on the kitchen counter where Daniel had left it. Grace had stared at it for hours after returning home. It wasn't just the resemblance that shook her, it was the realization that the man she had loved as Dad had chosen to raise another child. A child who wasn't even allowed to be part of their lives. Why? Her thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. She opened it to find a courier holding a small manila envelope. "For Grace Ward," he said. "Signed delivery." She frowned, took it, and closed the door behind her. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in the same neat script she knew too well. Eleanor. Inside was a single sheet of paper. And a key. Rusted. Old. The letter was brief, but it cut like glass. "My Gracie, you were the last one who stayed, the one who called on birthdays, the one who remembered me when the others forgot. But when I needed you most, even you disappeared. I don't hate you for it. I understand. Pain makes cowards of us all. But now I'm asking you to be brave. Go to Unit 17C. You'll know what to do when you get there. And when you find what I left, you'll finally understand why I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Mom." The key in her hand suddenly felt heavy. The next morning, she drove to the outskirts of town, past the strip malls, past the shuttered factories, to a row of rusting storage units. She found 17C in the far back corner, its door streaked with dirt and time. She unlocked it with trembling hands. Inside was darkness. Dust motes danced in the air as she pulled the chain light. Her heart pounded. Then she saw it, stacked boxes labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Medical records. Letters. Peter. Adoption. Jonas. She pulled one box open. Inside were papers, photos, ultrasound scans. At the very bottom, a sealed envelope labeled, "In case Grace finds this first." She opened it with shaking fingers. "He told me to give the baby up, that we could fix our marriage if I just let it go. But I couldn't. I loved Peter. He was the first man who ever saw me for more than my duty. Your father found out, that's why he left. Not because of Jonas, but because of me. I tried to keep you all safe, but hiding the truth didn't protect us. It only postponed the reckoning. I'm sorry." Grace sank to the floor, the letter clutched to her chest. Her mother hadn't been perfect, but she had loved fiercely, imperfectly, desperately. And now, every wall Grace had built around herself began to crack. She wasn't sure what hurt more, that Eleanor had lived with all this pain, or that Grace had let her carry it alone. The light inside the storage unit flickered, casting long, uneasy shadows as Grace sat surrounded by the remnants of a secret life, a life her mother had hidden from them, piece by painful piece. Her hands trembled as she opened another box, her fingers brushing over worn manila folders stamped confidential in red. She reached inside and pulled out the top file. Jonas Hale, adoption case number 10953B, inside a birth certificate. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Birth mother Eleanor Margaret Ward. Father Peter Hale. Date of birth July 3, 1991. Name at birth Noah Ward. Noah. Jonas had once been Noah, a brother none of them had ever met. A brother Eleanor had been forced to give away. Grace couldn't hold it in anymore. She broke down in the silence, sobbing into the crook of her arm, her tears smudging the ink on the papers. All those years, Eleanor had quietly mourned the child she couldn't raise, while trying to love the three she was allowed to keep. And they, too blind, too proud, had abandoned her anyway. When she could finally breathe again, she opened the next box. Inside were letters, decades worth, tied together in a blue silk ribbon. Each one was from Peter Hale, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, addressed to Eleanor but never mailed. Grace unwrapped one at random. "Ellie, I saw him today. He has your eyes. He asks about you, and I don't know what to say. I want to bring him to you, to let you see what we made, but I know the danger. Your husband's threats weren't idle. I couldn't protect you then, and I can't now. But I promise, he will grow up knowing love, even if it can't be yours." Grace clutched the letter, overcome by the raw tenderness of Peter's words. The world she thought she knew was crumbling beneath her. Their father hadn't simply disappeared, he had fled. Not out of grief, but out of betrayal. And Eleanor, left behind, had been forced to live with both abandonment and silence. The next morning, Grace brought everything to Melissa and Daniel. The three siblings sat in Daniel's apartment, the papers spread across the dining table like puzzle pieces. No one spoke for a long time. Melissa traced the edge of Jonas's birth certificate, her mouth a thin, tight line. She named him Noah, after our grandfather. Daniel stared at the photos of Peter Hale, the man their mother had truly loved. And Dad, he found out? That's why he left. Not just that, Grace added, voice cracking. He threatened her. The letter says he gave her an ultimatum, him or the baby. And she chose the baby, Melissa whispered. She chose love, Daniel said quietly, even if it meant losing everything. A heavy silence followed. Then Melissa looked up. So Jonas, he's not some stranger. He's our half-brother. Grace nodded slowly. He's the only one who came looking for her when we didn't. That truth settled over them like a weight they could no longer avoid. Their mother hadn't written them out of the will out of spite. She had chosen to honor the child she lost, the child she never stopped loving, the child who had never once abandoned her. The Ward siblings stood in the echoing office of Roland Keene, the late afternoon sun casting golden bars through the tall windows. The once icy air between them had thawed, not into warmth, but into understanding, heavy and painful. The truth was no longer hiding in dusty boxes or coded letters. It was laid bare. And now, it was time for Eleanor to have her final say. Keene opened the final section of the will, his fingers steady despite the tension that crackled in the room like static. Your mother requested this portion be read only after all conditions were fulfilled, he said. She also left behind a message, her voice, recorded in her own words. But before that, you need to understand what she chose, and why. He slid a thick document across the table. The heading read, Final Amendment to the Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Ward. Daniel read aloud, his voice thick, To my children, Melissa, Daniel, and Grace. If you are reading this, then you have followed the path I left for you. You know the truth now. About Jonas. About your father. About me. I didn't do this to punish you. I did this to wake you. Because silence runs in our blood, and I refuse to let it poison another generation. Melissa swallowed hard as Keene continued. I gave everything to Jonas, not out of spite, but out of gratitude. He was the only one who searched for me. The only one who sat with me, week after week when my hands shook too badly to hold a cup. He never asked for anything. He just showed up. You three. I raised you with every ounce of love I had. I sacrificed more than I ever said. But in the end, I became invisible to you. Not hated. Not despised. Just forgotten. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. That's what hurt the most. Not that you were angry, but that you didn't care enough to ask why. Why I was always tired. Why I stopped sending birthday cards. Why I begged you to visit. You saw an aging woman who had nothing left to offer. And so you left me behind. Daniel closed his eyes, jaw clenched. But Jonas, my Noah, he found me, and in him I saw a piece of all of you. So I gave him the house, the savings, the paintings your father left behind. But this isn't the end of your inheritance. What I truly left you is him. The room fell into stunned silence. Keene stepped back, pressing a button on a small black speaker. A soft crackle of static gave way to Eleanor's voice, frail but steady. My darlings, she began, if you're listening to this, then I'm already gone. And perhaps that's the only way I'd ever be heard. I don't want your forgiveness. I want your understanding. Jonas is your brother, flesh and blood. And he needs you as much as you need each other, even if you can't see it yet. This family has been broken long enough. Don't let my story be the ending. Let it be the beginning of something you never gave yourselves permission to have. Healing. You left me behind, but I never left you." When the recording ended, no one moved. Even Keene remained still, as though giving them space to absorb the gravity of what had just unfolded. Then Grace broke the silence. "She didn't write us out of her life. She wrote us into his." Melissa nodded slowly. "She gave us one last chance to be a family." Daniel looked down at his hands. "The question is, do we take it?" For the first time in years, the siblings weren't looking backward. They were staring straight into the wreckage and wondering if anything could still be rebuilt. The air inside the cottage on Bellflower Hill was heavy with anticipation. Jonas Hale stood by the fireplace, his posture stiff, uncertain. He had expected this day, but not like this. Not with all three Ward siblings standing across from him, their faces filled with grief, guilt, and something else he couldn't yet name. Melissa, poised but pale, avoided his gaze. Grace clutched a manila envelope, her fingers trembling. Daniel stood with arms crossed, the muscle in his jaw twitching every few seconds. They looked like a jury, but they weren't here to pass judgment. They were here for closure. Jonas cleared his throat. "You read the letters?" Grace nodded. "All of them." Jonas's voice was quiet. "Then you know who I am," Daniel answered, not with hostility, but a raw edge. "You're our brother." A beat of silence. The word felt strange on everyone's tongue. Heavy. New. "I didn't come looking for money," Jonas said quickly. "I didn't even know about the will until your mother passed. I found her 3 years ago through a DNA test and a half-lost adoption trail. I didn't expect anything. Just wanted to see her. Just once." "And you stayed," Melissa said. It wasn't accusatory. It was something close to wonder. "All that time, you stayed." "She needed someone," Jonas replied, his voice tight. "And I needed answers." Grace stepped forward. "Why didn't she tell us about you? Why keep you hidden all these years?" Jonas hesitated, then pointed to the envelope in Grace's hands. "She left that for today, said it was her last word to all of us." Grace slowly opened the envelope, pulling out a final letter written in Eleanor's elegant, careful script. She read aloud, voice quivering. "My loves, if you're together now, then I've already had my greatest wish fulfilled. I only ever wanted my children, all of my children, to be in the same room, not as strangers, but as something more, as survivors of the same storm. You were each born from different moments in my life, pain, love, fear, and hope. I tried to hold those pieces together to keep the walls from caving in, but I failed. And in my silence, I lost you. Jonas, Noah, was my secret because the world wouldn't have let me keep him. Your father made sure of that. He gave me a choice that no mother should ever face. I chose life. I chose him. And I have lived with that choice every day. To Melissa, Daniel, and Grace, I know you felt abandoned, but I never stopped watching over you. I hoped this letter would be read not by divided hearts, but by one united family. A broken one, maybe, but still a family. This is my last word. Don't let me be the reason you never forgive each other. Don't let my silence become yours. Find your way back to each other before it's too late." Grace's voice broke on the last line, and the room fell into stillness. Jonas turned away, his throat tight. Melissa stepped forward first. "I don't know how to start," she whispered. Jonas met her eyes for the first time. "Neither do I." Daniel stepped beside them. "Then maybe we figure it out together." Grace nodded, tears falling freely now. "We owe her that much." For the first time, the siblings stood in a circle, not as fractured pieces of a broken past, but as reluctant participants in the fragile hope their mother had left behind. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. A storm had passed, and for the first time in years, something like peace began to rise. Not the end, but maybe a beginning.